Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Well, in all the chaos and confusion of the last 48 hours, one thing is very, very clear. The government just doesn't get it. We see all the speculation, all the backgrounding, all the backstabbing about who wants what job. We see the positioning about who will be the next Treasurer across the newspapers of Australia. We see all the backgrounding against each other and the blame shifting about whose fault the mess is. And one thing's very clear. They don't understand the problem. Madam Speaker, all the speculation about staff members, all the speculation about who said what to who, all the speculation about who's on the outer in the Prime Minister's office, none of that matters. None of that matters if a government's going well. None of that matters, Madam Speaker, if the Australian people have trust in their government. None of that matters, Mr Deputy Speaker, if the bonds of trust haven't been broken between a Prime Minister and the nation. And the fundamental problem with this government, that the government still just doesn't understand and get, is that those bonds of trust have been broken by the entire government with the Australian people. They were broken in May by the Treasurer, who brought down a budget with unfairness at its core. They were broken in May by the Treasurer, who brought down a budget which systemically, methodically, calmly broke every election commitment that they made. Can you imagine them going through the Real Solutions document, saying, "Oh, we missed one. We haven't broken that promise yet." They're very methodical when it comes to breaking their election promises. They went through, ticked them off one by one. They went through and ticked them off and said, "Now we have. Now we've broken every promise." And that was the trust which was broken with the Australian people. They knew it. The Treasurer knew it. That's why, when the Treasury prepared the table showing the impact on Australian families of the budget, just as they've done for every Treasurer since Peter Costello, said, "Here they are, Treasurer, here are the tables," he said, "Oh, don't put them in the budget. Keep them out of the budget. That would be too open and transparent for my liking," said the member for North Sydney, the Treasurer. "We can't tell the Australian people the impact of our decision. Take them out of the budget." The first Treasurer who did that, he knew the impact of the Australian people, of their budget. Now, has anything changed in the last 48 hours? Has anything changed in the last 48 hours? The Prime Minister apparently said, "Oh, the budget was too ambitious, too bold." So what elements have been dropped, Mr Deputy Speaker? That's a very fair question. What elements have been dropped? Has the GP tax been dropped? No. He told the party room that we might drop it, but then we had a bit of cleaning up, a bit of speculation. No, it's still government policy. Has the decision not to put the submarines out to open tender been dropped? No. No, that's now very clear. He won a couple of extra votes from the South Australians by telling them he would, and then he didn't. Nothing's changed. Have $100,000 degrees for Australians been dropped? Not on your life. They haven't been dropped at all. What about the decision to take $80 a week away, from Australia's pensioners over the next 10 years by cutting indexation? Hasn't been dropped. Still their policy. The decision to make Australians work till they're 70, a longer working life than any other country in the world, hasn't been dropped. Not by this Prime Minister, not by this Treasurer. The decision to create an underclass by removing the ability of young people to receive New Start in Australia. The decision to deliberately, calmly and methodically create an underclass in Australia by taking away the right to unemployment benefits when people fall on hard times, no, hasn't been dropped. The government just doesn't get it. They don't get that at its core. Their problem with the Australian people is not who's in what's job. It's not the sales job, as bad as it's been from the Treasurer. It's the product. It's the product. It's the product of his budget. It's the product of their dishonesty. And it's the product of their strategy, their collective strategy, agreed between all of them to mislead the Australian people at the last election. We know it was agreed between all of them. We saw the Prime Minister today reassert that none of the budget measures have been dropped. We saw the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party say this was a cabinet process, confirm it was a cabinet process. And of course we've heard the Minister for Communications say on 2GB, "I support unreservedly and wholeheartedly every element in this budget, every single one." Every single one. That's his position now. That's his position now. That was his position then. And that's his position as he circles the Prime Minister of Australia waiting for the right time to strike. And of course, the Minister for Finance belled the cat on Sunday. Nobody's raised with the Minister for Finance that the budget's unfair in the entire front bench. Not one of them's gone to the Treasurer or the Minister for Finance and said, I think cutting the pensions unfair. I think cutting young people out of New Start's unfair. I think making Australians work to their 70s unfair. Not one single one of them has had the gumption or the courage to stand up for Australians who know that this budget's unfair. They know, Madam Speaker, Mr Deputy Speaker, that they're in deep trouble with the Australian people, but they don't know how to fix it because they will not drop and cannot drop their unfair budget, whether they drop the Treasurer or not. What needs to change is the budget and the approach to the Australian people, not the Treasurer. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that this has had an impact on the economy because the Australian people say this. We sort of expect Liberal governments to be unfair, but we sort of expect them to be competent as they go about it. And they haven't even managed that. We've seen the mixed messages. We've seen the loss of narrative. We've seen the changed approach from day after day. We've seen the Prime Minister who can't have the same message in the morning as the afternoon, who tells the senators from South Australia one thing and his ministers another. The Treasurer, who can't decide whether he's brilliant because he's passed the entire budget or the parliament's terrible because it won't pass the budget at all. He can't work it out. He can't work out whether the savings are necessary for budget repair or to create a medical health and research fund or for tax cuts. They're apparently all three all at once. No wonder the Australian people have lost confidence in this Treasurer and in this economy. No wonder the Australian people have seen consumer confidence and business confidence fall on this Treasurer's watch. Fall on this Treasurer's watch. That was 93.2 in January, said the Westpac Melbourne Institute, because this unfair budget has smashed consumer confidence. Westpac's chief economist Bill Evans said pessimists still outnumber optimists by a significant majority. Well, why wouldn't the Australian people lose confidence when the Australian government doesn't have confidence in the Treasurer? Why wouldn't the Australian people lose confidence in their budget, in their government, when they see headlines like this? If the government doesn't have confidence in the Treasurer, how can the Australian people have confidence in the Treasurer? They're the best headline since this one, Mr Deputy Speaker. The best headline since this one we see in Australia's media. Why wouldn't the Australian people lose confidence in their Treasurer? And they lose confidence in their Treasurer because he's being dishonest with them. We know he breaks his promises. Now we know he breaks the law as well. He breaks the law as well. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Charter of Budget Honesty is very clear.
Member McMahon will withdraw that assertion that the member has broken the law.
Speaker, the law is very clear and the government's in breach of the law.
No, withdraw unreservedly.
I withdraw.
Unreservedly.
Unreservedly. I withdraw, Mr Deputy Speaker. We know the Treasurer breaches his promises, and we also know the government has not complied with the Charter of Budget Honesty. The Charter of Budget Honesty, which is the law of the land, very clear, says that the intergenerational report shall be released 5 years after the last one. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, 5 years has been and 5 years has gone and the Treasurer has not released the report. Now, the intergenerational report was not a Labor invention. It was something instituted by Peter Costello as Treasurer. And it's something that the Labor Party honoured in office because we could see the benefit. We could see that it's become an important document. We welcome the discussion around the intergenerational report. And what does this Treasurer do? He can't even get his homework in on time. He sits on the report. Why? Well, because he sees the intergenerational report as his political plaything. He sees the intergenerational report as his excuse, his political opportunity to try and reboot the budget debate. Let's have another go, he says. We've only had 76 reboots. Let's have another go. Let's release the intergenerational report, but he releases it in a time frame which is not allowed for by the Charter of Budget Honesty, very clearly. As much as the government may try to ignore the fact or deny the fact is clear, the law is clear, and this government's in breach of it. And when the Treasurer eventually gets around to releasing the intergenerational report, it will be clear that he has used it as his political plaything. He has used it as his political plaything to make up for the fact, as an excuse, that he's got a budget which he cannot sell. And the fact of the matter is he can't sell it because it's an appalling document. It's a bad product to sell by a bad salesman who has seen consumer and business confidence fall on his watch. Now, we're about to get a job application from the Assistant Treasurer. We're about to get a job application from him. Well, if he does his job, he'll comply with the law. He could release the intergeneration report. He could do it. He could say, I'm not going to breach the law,
Order.
but he
The honourable
won't.
member's
But he
time
won't
has
because
expired.
this
And I
government...
call the Honourable the Assistant Treasurer.